The afternoon sky was heavy with gray clouds, and a damp breeze drifted through the empty streets, carrying a faint sense of restlessness. Officer Larry Jenkins trudged slowly along the sidewalk, boredom pressing heavily upon him as the monotonous hours of his shift dragged by without incident. He yearned desperately for something, anything, to interrupt the tedious routine and fill the vacant hours with purpose or excitement. As if answering his silent plea, Larry's attention was suddenly drawn toward a solitary figure standing near a tree, a large German shepherd, its powerful silhouette stark against the muted backdrop. The dog remained calm, unusually still, its sharp eyes fixed intently on something beyond Larry's line of sight. A wave of curiosity tinged with mischief passed through the officer's mind as he considered the quiet animal. "Alone, huh? Let's see how tough you really are," Larry murmured softly to himself, a smirk creeping onto his lips as he reached for the pepper spray hanging from his belt. Without hesitation or second thought, Larry approached cautiously, his eyes narrowing in anticipation. With a careless flick of his wrist, he released a quick burst of pepper spray directly into the dog's unsuspecting face. A sharp hiss punctuated the silence as the stinging chemical cloud enveloped the German shepherd's sensitive eyes, causing the dog to stumble backward with an involuntary bark. The animal shook its head violently, blinking rapidly, a soft whimper escaping its muzzle as it struggled to recover from the unexpected assault. Larry felt a surge of perverse amusement at the dog's obvious discomfort and couldn't suppress a harsh laugh that echoed off the deserted buildings. "Relax, buddy. It's just a little pepper spray, you'll survive," he sneered mockingly, clearly entertained by the dog's disorientation. Yet, despite Larry's provocation, the dog did not flee. Instead, it stood resolutely, shaking off the pain, its piercing eyes now locked steadily on Larry with an unsettling calm, as though waiting patiently for something or someone. This unexpected reaction began to unsettle Larry, but he brushed aside the feeling, his arrogance still clouding any deeper reflection on what he had just done. The distant hum of wheels rolling along pavement disrupted the tense silence, snapping Larry's attention toward a figure approaching slowly down the sidewalk. As the individual drew nearer, Larry's smugness rapidly evaporated, replaced by a cold dread that pooled in the pit of his stomach. The newcomer, seated comfortably in a motorized wheelchair and wearing dark glasses, carried an unmistakable aura of authority and dignity that instantly triggered a sinking recognition. The German shepherd immediately trotted over, nudging its nose gently against the man's outstretched hand, visibly comforted by his presence. "Alfredo, what happened to you?" the man asked softly, concern evident in his voice as his hand ran tenderly along the dog's muzzle. Larry's blood ran cold as he finally realized the gravity of what he had done. This wasn't merely any dog or any owner. This was Richard Blake, a beloved retired police captain who had lost his sight serving the community. Alfredo was no ordinary pet. He was Blake's trusted companion and former Nine partner, known widely for his bravery and loyalty. Larry's throat tightened painfully, the realization of his cruelty and its potential repercussions flooding him with regret. He swallowed hard, suddenly acutely aware of the gathering attention and judgmental whispers around him. Blake's head turned slightly toward him, sensing his presence. "Who's there?" Blake asked quietly but firmly, his voice carrying an unmistakable authority despite his calm demeanor. Larry felt trapped, unable to escape the confrontation that loomed before him. "Officer Jenkins," he replied hesitantly, his voice cracking slightly, betraying the uncertainty and shame he now felt. Blake paused, absorbing this revelation in silence. His expression shifted subtly, conveying disappointment deeper than anger could ever express. Larry stood frozen in place, comprehending for the first time that his reckless and thoughtless action had not merely harmed a defenseless animal, but had profoundly disrespected a hero of their community and jeopardized his own career and reputation. As murmurs from bystanders grew louder, Larry realized this was a moment that would haunt him, a stark reminder of the line he had crossed, a line that separated authority from cruelty. As the sound of wheels rolling steadily over the sidewalk grew louder, Larry felt his stomach knotting with dread. The man approaching was instantly recognizable, Richard Blake, the retired police captain whose storied career had become a part of Cedar Creek's proud history. Seated confidently in his motorized wheelchair, Blake wore dark glasses to shield eyes long blinded in the line of duty. Despite his calm, measured movements, Blake exuded quiet authority, a stark contrast to Larry's sinking bravado. Alfredo, the German shepherd Larry had callously pepper-sprayed moments earlier, trotted swiftly to Blake's side, gently nudging his nose into his owner's outstretched palm. Blake's fingers moved tenderly over the dog's muzzle, his brow furrowing in concern. "Alfredo, what happened to you?" he asked softly, his voice tinged with genuine affection and worry. This simple question pierced Larry's conscience, sharpening his sense of guilt. His pulse quickened as he stood rooted to the spot, dread surging through him. For the first time, Larry fully grasped the severity of his reckless act. Not only had he harmed a defenseless animal, but he had also wounded a cherished companion of a man revered by the entire community. Larry's heart began pounding fiercely as Blake turned slowly in his direction, his head tilted slightly, sensing the presence of another person nearby. "Who's there?" Blake asked quietly. Yet there was unmistakable steel underlying his calm tone. The quiet authority in his voice cut deeper than any reprimand Larry had ever received. Clearing his throat nervously, Larry hesitated, his bravado now stripped away, leaving him vulnerable and exposed. "It's Officer Jenkins," he replied weakly, his voice trembling under the weight of Blake's scrutiny and the quiet murmurs from bystanders who had started to gather around the unfolding scene. Blake paused momentarily, allowing the silence to deepen, intensifying Larry's discomfort. When he finally spoke again, Blake's voice was low and steady, but edged with restrained anger. "So it was you," he said quietly, a simple phrase that resonated powerfully in the still air. "Alfredo isn't just a dog, he's my guide, my eyes, my friend. You attacked him without reason." The gentle but firm reproach sliced into Larry's pride, his face reddening under the intense scrutiny of onlookers whose eyes bore into him with unmistakable judgment. The whispers grew louder, spreading quickly among the crowd, each hushed comment like a knife twist in Larry's reputation. "Isn't that Officer Jenkins?" someone asked in disbelief, prompting others to nod knowingly, their gazes cold and accusatory. Larry's reputation for pushing boundaries had always preceded him, but this felt different. This time he'd crossed a line that couldn't easily be undone. Unable to bear the pressure, Larry attempted feebly to justify his actions. "Look, Captain Blake, I didn't realize it was Alfredo. I thought he was just a stray dog," he stammered, hoping his weak excuse would somehow lessen the severity of his wrongdoing. But Blake shook his head slowly, disappointment etched deeply into every line of his expression. You didn't mean any harm?" Blake repeated incredulously, his voice thick with restrained indignation. "You sprayed pepper directly into the eyes of a trained service dog? Jenkins, do you even comprehend the damage you could have caused? Alfredo isn't just a pet, he's a hero, a dedicated partner who has saved countless lives, including mine. He deserves respect, not cruelty." Blake's words landed heavily, each sentence intensifying Larry's growing shame. Alfredo, sensing his owner's agitation, moved protectively closer, letting out a low, defensive growl directed squarely at Larry. The message was unmistakable. Alfredo trusted Blake completely and would fiercely defend him, even against a familiar badge. The intensity of the dog's reaction only deepened Larry's humiliation. The realization washed over him like a wave of cold water. This wasn't just about pepper spray or a dog. It was about trust, dignity, and respect. Blake's disappointment wasn't loud or dramatic. Instead, it was quiet, composed, and devastatingly powerful. Larry swallowed hard, his mouth dry, his pride shattered. Standing under the harsh glare of public condemnation, he understood clearly that no excuse could ever justify his actions, and that from this moment onward, he would bear the heavy burden of this disgraceful incident, a burden he had recklessly created for himself. Larry's heart sank deeper with every passing moment as the reality of his actions began to settle in. The once familiar hallways of the police station now felt alien, filled with quiet murmurs and disapproving glances from colleagues who had once been friendly. His misdeed had spread quickly throughout Cedar Creek, accelerated by videos and posts on social media that painted him clearly and unapologetically as the villain of the story. Sitting alone in his patrol car, Larry scrolled through comments online, each remark striking deeper, intensifying the sting of humiliation. Words like disgrace, cruel, and unworthy of the badge glared back at him, highlighting the enormity of his mistake. He switched off the phone, unable to bear reading another harsh comment, but it did little to silence the internal voices condemning him. With heavy reluctance, Larry finally stepped into Captain Harris's office, knowing full well that the conversation awaiting him would only further cement his disgrace. The air inside was tense and oppressive, Harris's expression hard and unyielding. "Sit down," Harris said curtly, his eyes locked on Larry without warmth or sympathy. Larry complied hesitantly, sinking into the chair, his throat tightening as he waited for judgment. Captain Harris didn't waste time softening the blow. "You know why you're here," Harris began coldly, his voice echoing with quiet disappointment. Larry's weak attempt to justify himself was swiftly shut down as Harris raised a hand, cutting him off sharply. "You didn't recognize Alfredo, one of the most distinguished and beloved service dogs this town has ever known?" Harris asked incredulously, his eyes narrowing with barely contained frustration. "Your carelessness has brought shame upon this department. People trust us, Jenkins. They trust officers like you to protect and serve, not to act impulsively and cruelly. Your reckless action has damaged that trust irreparably." Each word Harris spoke landed heavily, pressing down on Larry's chest until he could barely breathe. Desperately, Larry tried once more to downplay his wrongdoing, his voice wavering as he muttered that he didn't think clearly and hadn't meant harm. But even to his own ears, his excuses rang hollow, insufficient to justify the senseless harm inflicted upon Alfredo and the subsequent public outrage. Harris's glare silenced any further attempt at defense, his decision clear and uncompromising. "You're suspended, effective immediately, pending further investigation," Harris declared sharply, his tone leaving no room for debate. "Turn in your badge and firearm before leaving today." The command echoed painfully within Larry, each word an undeniable testament to his failure. Exiting Harris's office, Larry felt every stare like a physical blow, shame burning hot beneath his skin. Colleagues quickly averted their gazes or exchanged quiet whispers as he passed, their cold detachment stinging worse than open confrontation. Larry wandered aimlessly through the streets afterward, keenly aware of the disapproving glances of townspeople who had once respected or at least tolerated his authority. At a local diner, patrons glanced at him warily, murmuring quietly about his disgraceful behavior. Their hushed conversations carried just loudly enough for Larry to hear, deepening his humiliation. He sank onto a bench in the town square, weighed down by regret and the realization that his actions had stripped him of dignity and trust, two things he'd carelessly taken for granted. Lost in thought, Larry barely noticed Rachel, his longtime friend and fellow officer, approach him cautiously. Her expression was stern yet tinged with genuine sadness. "You've really made a mess, Larry," she began bluntly, her tone honest and unsparing. He nodded numbly, staring at the ground as she continued firmly. "This isn't something you can just shrug off or justify. You humiliated the department, the town, and most importantly, you betrayed Captain Blake and Alfredo, who've done nothing but good for this community." Her words, direct and piercing, cut through Larry's defenses, forcing him to face the full extent of his wrongdoing. "You can't just hide behind excuses anymore," she warned softly, yet her voice softened slightly. "If you want any chance at redemption, you need to truly own up. Publicly apologize, not just to Blake, but to everyone you've disappointed." Rachel's blunt honesty hung heavily in the air, confronting Larry with the harsh truth he'd long avoided. As she walked away, leaving him alone with his thoughts, Larry understood clearly that regaining respect would demand far more than words. It would require genuine humility, deep introspection, and sincere, sustained effort to repair the trust he had recklessly shattered. In the days following the painful confrontation, Larry found himself trapped in a relentless cycle of remorse and self-doubt, his thoughts consumed by the weight of his reckless behavior. He couldn't escape the look of quiet disappointment he'd seen on Blake's face or forget Alfredo's quiet whimpers. The memory gnawed at him relentlessly. Each time he stepped outside, he felt eyes watching him, accusing whispers following him from street corners, diners, and storefronts. His once familiar community had become a hostile landscape, filled with silent judgments and cold stares. After several restless nights spent wrestling with guilt, Larry knew he couldn't go on pretending everything would simply fade away. Determined to make things right, or at least begin the difficult journey toward redemption, he finally mustered the courage to approach Blake's modest home. Standing awkwardly at the front door, Larry's heart pounded heavily, the knot of anxiety tightening in his chest. Every part of him screamed to retreat, but he knew fleeing now would only deepen the wound he'd inflicted. Swallowing hard, he hesitated briefly, questioning how words alone could possibly heal the damage he had caused. Before he could reconsider, the door opened, revealing Blake standing calmly, expression unreadable behind his dark glasses, his posture tense with guarded expectation. Larry took a deep breath. struggling to gather his thoughts as he met Blake's quiet presence head-on. "Captain Blake? I wanted to come by and sincerely apologize for my behavior," Larry stammered, the words awkward and uneven, barely conveying the sincerity he deeply wished to express. Blake remained silent, listening intently, his stillness amplifying the pressure Larry felt to continue. "What I did to Alfredo was thoughtless and cruel. I had no excuse. I wasn't thinking clearly, and I deeply regret my actions. I understand how much Alfredo means to you. He's not just a service dog, he's your companion, your friend, your lifeline. What I did was inexcusable," Larry admitted, his voice faltering slightly under the weight of his admission. Blake stood quietly for a moment, absorbing the apology in a silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Finally, he broke the stillness, his voice soft yet piercing, carrying the weight of profound disappointment. "You weren't thinking, that's abundantly clear. But do you truly understand what you did? Alfredo isn't just an ordinary dog, he's my eyes, my independence. He allows me to maintain my dignity and freedom, something you carelessly threatened without any thought." Each word Blake spoke struck Larry harder than he'd anticipated, forcing him to confront the full gravity of his mistake. Alfredo stood quietly beside his owner, his gaze steady and unreadable, lending silent strength to Blake's calm but firm words. Larry nodded slowly, deeply aware of the magnitude of his error and determined not to evade responsibility any longer. After a long silence, Blake shifted slightly, his expression softening just a little as he exhaled deeply. "Words alone won't undo the damage you've done, Jenkins," Blake began cautiously, his tone measured and reflective. "But accountability is a start. If you truly mean what you're saying, you'll have to face the community and openly acknowledge your wrongdoing, not just to me, but to everyone you've hurt." Blake paused thoughtfully, then continued more firmly. "I want you to accompany me to the next town hall meeting. You'll stand in front of everyone, the very people whose trust you've shattered, and tell them exactly what you did wrong and why. It won't be easy, but it's necessary if you want even a chance at redemption." There he swallowed again, recognizing the truth in Blake's words and accepting that he could not avoid this painful step if he genuinely intended to change. The prospect was daunting, almost overwhelming, but he understood clearly that redemption required more than private remorse. It demanded public humility, honesty, and a willingness to accept criticism without defense. With newfound resolve, Larry nodded solemnly, accepting the challenge Blake had laid before him. For the first time since the incident, he felt a small measure of relief, knowing he'd taken the crucial first step toward repairing the damage he'd done, not only to Alfredo and Blake, but to the entire community he had vowed to serve. Larry arrived early at the community center on the evening of the town hall meeting, his heart hammering anxiously as he took in the steadily filling seats and the murmurs echoing off the walls. Every face that entered was familiar neighbors he'd known for years, shopkeepers who had always greeted him warmly, and families he'd assisted countless times as a police officer. Yet tonight, their expressions were weary, filled with skepticism and quiet judgment. Larry sat uncomfortably near the front, painfully aware that each gaze fixed upon him carried with it disappointment, anger, or simply cautious curiosity. Beside him, Blake sat quietly, composed yet attentive, his presence both supportive and sobering. Alfredo rested calmly at Blake's feet, occasionally raising his head to glance at Larry as if silently reminding him of the weight of responsibility he carried. The tension in the room was tangible, a dense cloud pressing down on Larry's shoulders, tightening around his chest. Captain Harris soon opened the meeting, speaking briefly and firmly about accountability and trust, his words subtly but unmistakably directed toward Larry. Then came the moment Larry dreaded most, the introduction of his own name, signaling the time for him to face the community head-on, to openly acknowledge his wrongdoing and seek forgiveness. Taking a deep breath, Larry stood slowly and moved toward the podium, each step heavier than the last. He felt exposed and raw, the protective veil of authority now completely stripped away. Standing before the crowded hall, he paused for a moment, his mind momentarily blank, his mouth dry. Looking out, he saw familiar faces, some openly hostile, others cautiously expectant, all waiting silently for him to speak. Larry swallowed hard, gathering his courage, then finally began, his voice soft but steady. "I know you're all here tonight because of what I did to Alfredo and Captain Blake," he admitted, his words ringing with genuine remorse. "What I did was cruel, irresponsible, and completely inexcusable. Alfredo isn't just a dog, he's a hero who has saved lives and is a lifeline for Captain Blake. My actions betrayed the trust of this community, a trust I took an oath to uphold. As Larry spoke, the murmurs quieted, and the hall fell into a tense silence. He continued, his voice strengthening as he laid bare the truth he had avoided confronting for so long. For years, I've served this town, and in one moment of carelessness, I shattered the very trust I worked to build. Tonight, I'm not here to make excuses or offer hollow apologies. I'm here because you deserve better, because I owe you honesty and accountability. I've failed you all, and I deeply regret it. The sincerity in Larry's voice was palpable, undeniable, reaching even those whose skepticism was most hardened. Some listeners shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others slowly nodded, recognizing the genuine nature of his remorse. Finishing his words, Larry stepped back slightly from the podium, the heavy silence hanging in the air like an unanswered question. For a young moment, no one moved or spoke, as if the community itself were collectively holding its breath. Then, quietly but firmly, a slow, deliberate applause began from the back of the room. Larry glanced up, startled to see Rachel standing there, meeting his gaze with quiet support and approval. Gradually, a handful of others joined her, their cautious applause breaking the oppressive silence. Though not unanimous, it was enough a fragile acknowledgement that perhaps redemption, though difficult, was not impossible. Blake turned toward Larry, nodding slightly, a small gesture carrying enormous significance. Larry felt a rush of relief mingled with humility, recognizing clearly that this moment was not an end, but rather the beginning of a long, challenging road toward repairing the damage he'd done. After the meeting, as the crowd dispersed, several community members approached Larry cautiously, some offering restrained encouragement, others expressing lingering doubts openly. Larry listened to each with humility and patience, knowing fully that rebuilding trust would take far more than a single heartfelt apology. Yet, for the first time since his grievous error, he saw a path forward, illuminated not by easy forgiveness, but by the challenging and necessary work of accountability. As he finally left the hall, Larry carried with him not only the heavy burden of his past mistakes, but also the hopeful resolve that, through honesty and genuine effort, he might one day regain the respect he had lost. After the emotionally charged town hall meeting, Larry knew his words alone could never repair the harm he'd done. Only his actions over time could truly heal the wounds. Determined to demonstrate genuine remorse, Larry began volunteering at the local animal shelter, the same place where Alfredo had once trained. The shelter, run by Mrs. Henderson, a tough yet compassionate woman, greeted Larry with cautious skepticism, aware of his tarnished reputation. Without ceremony, she assigned him to the least glamorous tasks: cleaning kennels, washing dog beds, and feeding traumatized animals, duties that felt humbling and strenuous. Larry initially found the work exhausting, physically and emotionally challenging, but he quickly realized the deeper lesson beneath these menial tasks. Each frightened, injured animal he cared for mirrored his own damaged reputation, needing patience and kindness to rebuild trust. Larry discovered day by day the powerful truth that genuine redemption required sustained humility and hard work rather than fleeting gestures or mere apologies. Weeks turned into months, and gradually Larry's presence at the shelter began to soften attitudes toward him in Cedar Creek. Mrs. Henderson, initially doubtful, grew to respect his quiet dedication, noting his growing patience and compassion, qualities she'd once assumed he lacked. Then one cold morning, an urgent call came in. Rex, a new arrival at the shelter, had escaped during the night, frightened and potentially aggressive after years of mistreatment. Animal control had already tried unsuccessfully to capture him, and Rex's anxiety only intensified the community's fear. Recognizing an opportunity to demonstrate genuine change, Larry volunteered immediately to help find the frightened dog. After hours spent searching through cold, damp forest trails, Larry finally spotted Rex cowering near a fallen tree. Instead of acting impulsively as he might have in the past, Larry approached slowly and calmly, recalling the patient techniques he had observed shelter staff using with traumatized animals. "It's okay, Rex," he whispered soothingly, carefully offering a treat, maintaining steady eye contact without aggression or threat. The frightened dog watched wearily but gradually began to trust, stepping cautiously forward until Larry gently clipped the leash to his collar. As he led Rex safely back to the shelter, Larry felt a powerful sense of accomplishment unlike anything he had experienced before. This wasn't merely about capturing a runaway animal. It symbolized the deeper restoration of trust, proving to himself and others that genuine change was possible, but only through humility, perseverance, and true sincerity. News of Larry's successful rescue spread quickly through Cedar Creek, slowly shifting the town's view of him from one of outright contempt to cautious optimism. Neighbors who previously avoided his gaze began greeting him with guarded respect, quietly acknowledging his effort. Even Blake eventually heard about Rex's rescue and visited the shelter with Alfredo, offering Larry subtle approval through his quiet, dignified presence. Larry knew this was merely one step in a much longer journey, but the respect he gradually regained offered profound encouragement. Reflecting on his experiences, Larry came to understand a critical lesson. True redemption isn't achieved through a single act or sincere apology alone. Instead, it demands ongoing humility, sustained effort, and unwavering commitment to change, even when the path is uncomfortable and challenging. In reality, Larry's story holds a powerful message for all of us. Mistakes, no matter how severe, don't necessarily define who we are permanently, provided we accept responsibility fully and commit sincerely to the difficult process of making amends. Larry's transformation wasn't simply about repairing his reputation. It was about restoring his humanity through continuous acts of genuine kindness and accountability. Ultimately, redemption isn't merely granted. It must be earned every day through our actions, reminding us all that the path toward becoming better individuals is built step by step through integrity, humility, and unwavering effort.